Hello everybody, my name is Alan, and today we're going to be talking about how to do full manual on any DSLR or mirrorless camera. Now, let's roll that intro. Learning manual can be quite hard and quite overwhelming. You might feel like you need to spend a lot of money on an expensive course in order to learn it well. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not true, and I'm going to take you through a series of real-world events that you're going to need to change your settings in order to get unique and creative shots. Now, I hope that this video is under 10 minutes so you guys can get out and shooting as quickly as possible and start practicing. But let's get to it. Let's talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is how long your camera shutter is open, releasing light into the sensor. Essentially, how long you're taking the photo. Now, this can play in a lot of effects in your images, which can give you a lot of creative leverage and can give you a super crisp motion shot. Let's say you're doing sports photography. Then you generally want a higher shutter speed to capture the motion going on around the subject. But with landscape and portrait photography, that's not really required because there's not much motion and can give you a lot of creative leverage that can help you get unique images. So since shutter speed is how long your shutter is open, releasing light into the sensor, the faster it is, obviously the less light's going to get in. So 1/4000th of a second, let's put an example, which for you guys it's probably the max that your camera can go up to. It's going to release very, very small amounts of light onto the camera sensor. But let's say you're shooting at 1/400th of a second. You're going to notice a lot more light coming into your sensor compared to 1/4000th. But let's say you don't have the light. Let's say you want to shoot action at blue light. I don't know why you'd be doing that, but let's say you need it. Let's say you're shooting hockey indoors and you need a high shutter speed. Well, that's where knowing aperture really comes in. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Okay, so aperture is the opening in the lens's diaphragm, letting light into the sensor. The lower the f-stop, the wider it is, letting more light in. But the higher the f-stop, the thinner it actually is, and letting less light in. Lower f-stops you normally use for portraiture or when you want to isolate the not the background, you want to isolate your subject. This will give it a nice blurry effect in the background, but your subject will still remain sharp. But let's say you're shooting a landscape, for example. Maybe you don't want just one subject. Maybe you want to show like an entire mountain. In that case, you're going to want a higher f-stop, like let's say f8. It's going to let light in, but like we said before, shutter speed in landscapes doesn't really matter because your subject normally is not moving. So, referring to that, let's bring you with a scenario. So let's say you're at 1/800th of a second and you're at f-stop 3.5 and your light meter, which by the way is the thing that tells you if you're overexposed or underexposed, says you're 2 stops underexposed. You could bring your shutter speed 2 stops lower, so 1/500th of a second, or you could bring your aperture 2 times lower, letting it more light in, making it wider, right? So you'd go from 3.5 to 3.2 to 2.8, and there you go. You gain 2 stops of light. Now, 2.8 is relatively a wide aperture, and let's say you're shooting a landscape, maybe you would be better off lowering your shutter speed, but I'm mainly a portrait photographer, so this is a portrait scenario. Same as with product photography and bunch of other photographers that need this, but this is just a scenario. There are so many different scenarios in photography that I don't have, frankly, the time to explain all of them to you. So yeah, that's about aperture. Now let's say you still don't have enough light. Let's say you're shooting wide open, you're shooting at 1.8 or 1.4 or I doubt you have a 0.95 lens, but if you do, let's say you're shooting at that, right? Let's say you're shooting at these super wide apertures and you still don't have enough light, and you're also curious what the third number is, right? Well, that's where ISO comes into play. ISO is the image sensor's sensitivity to light. Now, the higher the number, the more sensitive it is to light. The lower the number, the less sensitive. Essentially, it's going to capture more light if you have a higher number. It's going to capture less light if you have a lower number. Pretty simple. Most cameras can go down to 100 ISO, but if you have a pro DSLR or mirrorless camera, you can probably go down to 60 if you have a battery grip, or maybe just can do that by itself, which is pretty good. So higher ISO is gonna introduce more grain into your image. Now you can use that to your artistic advantage, or like you could stay like me and I just like to have the least amount of grain as possible, but you do you. So you could reduce this in post-process and use Lightroom's noise reduction, but I highly don't recommend that because it will make your skin, if you're shooting portraits, it'll make skin tones a bit more smooth, but also make the eyes blurry-ish because you're taking details from the image. You're not necessarily making it blurrier, but you're just taking details that are gonna, I feel like, would ruin the image more than just having the grain itself. So I'm gonna assume you have a pretty entry-level DSLR or mirrorless camera, meaning you can probably shoot up to 6400 ISO without getting it disgusting and, you know, unusable. Now, I don't know your camera as well as you do, so I might be wrong, and you might have a pretty good entry-level camera that can shoot super high ISOs, and that's great. But most of you are gonna have a relatively not so high ISO camera. Now, this may have to do with your megapixels, but again, if you have an entry-level camera, essentially, the higher the megapixels, the easier that grain is going to show up. But the lower the megapixels, there's going to be less grain showing up. Now, that might vary within a camera. Like I know the A7R4, even at like 10,000 ISO, you barely notice the grain. You can notice it if you zoom in, but otherwise you barely notice it, and that's impressive. Good job, Sony, for that. So yeah, I'm gonna assume you guys have like a D5600 or a T7i or cameras similar to that can't necessarily go as high. Now, obviously, you guys have entry-level cameras. Like obviously, you guys aren't gonna have the best of the best gear because that's reserved for the best of the best photographers. But I still think you guys can have amazing results. I have a D5600. And I think I've gotten really good results with it, and it's a $700 camera with the 2 lenses. Now, you might have to increase your ISO relatively quite often with these entry-level cameras. Now, that's because you mainly have a kit lens, or you have the kit zoom, which is for Nikon. It's a 70-300 5.3, 6, something like that, to 6.3 aperture f-stop. But for Canon, I think it's maybe it's 70-250 millimeter, but I'm not entirely sure about that, so don't quote me on that. You Canon users can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. So most of those cameras, you're gonna have, it's not necessarily your camera. It's actually mainly your lens, because right now I'm shooting on a 50mm 1.8, and as you can see, the background's pretty blurry. Like, you can barely see my computer over here and everything. Like, it gives this nice cinematic and separation from the background, but it also lets more light in, and that's why I actually have to increase my shutter speed a tiny bit more when doing this video, because it will completely overpower the sunlight coming in from my face here and my shadows in this side. Now, it's kind of varies. Like, if I were to use my kit lens, I would actually have to use a lower shutter speed and would actually result in a slightly worse cinematic look than this, because my background would be more in focus, making it look more like a phone. But I don't know. You guys can definitely, I've gotten really nice landscape photography pictures even portraits with my kit lens. Kit lenses nowadays are significantly better than they were before, and honestly, they're just as sharp as some really expensive cameras. Some really expensive lenses nowadays, except that the only thing that those lenses have is that they have a lower f-stop. So you guys can get great results. You guys are not going to have to worry about high ISOs really if you have a better lens, but if you guys, I figured out a way, so you guys can definitely figure out a way. Let me tell you that. So yeah, that's about it. That you guys have learned everything about manual, and you now have gotten pretty much all the advice I can give you. This video is not gonna make you a professional photographer. There are so many other things that go with that I will have videos in the future, but these videos aren't gonna make you have the skill mastered. You're gonna need to practice different scenarios. You're gonna need to practice outdoors. You're gonna need to practice indoors. You're gonna need to practice at night. You're gonna need to practice at morning, golden hour, blue light. No, not blue light. Blue hour, astronomy hour, straight up night. There are so many different scenarios that I just can't go over them all today. It's pretty simple. So yeah, look forward for more videos that I'm going to be releasing soon. I'm going to try posting a video every week, which is going to be hard, but I believe I can do it. So yeah, consider liking and subscribing, but you guys know what to do. So I will see you in the next one.